If I am re-elected as your premier, we will supercharge this made-in-Alberta approach to petrochemicals and petroleum upgrading. We will double our current incentives from $3.6 billion to $7 billion over 10 years.
If elected, a united Conservative government will scrap the NDP carbon tax. If we are elected, the very first bill introduced in the next legislature will be the Carbon Tax Repeal Act.
In Alberta, the promises from each campaign have begun rolling out. Today is day 2 of the provincial election race. Rachel Notley called it yesterday, while a controversy surrounded the United Conservative Party and its leader, Jason Kenney, appears to deepen. So what will dominate this campaign? Questions about the economy or the so-called kamikaze controversy? We've convened an Alberta panel in Calgary. Marcella Monroe of KTG Public Affairs, and next to her, William McBeath is with Canadians for Democracy and Prosperity. And in Edmonton, Graham Thompson, of course, is a political columnist who contributes to CBC and iPolitics. Hello to all three of you. Really appreciate you guys spending some time with us this afternoon. Graham, I'm going to start with you because we were talking a few days ago, I think the day before the election was called, and specifically around this so-called kamikaze controversy. We know today the Alberta Election Commissioner, or I think yesterday, posted about $8,000 in fines against a person found to have taken money from a third party to donate to Jeff Callaway's campaign. That's the supposed kamikaze candidate when he was running against Brian Jean and Jason Kenney for UCP leader. We were trying to get a read a few days ago on if this story would have any impact on voters. Now that the election's being called, what do you think?
You know, I somehow doubt it at this point. The problem is it takes 2 or 3 minutes to explain this story. And there's no
as we just witnessed,
yeah. Well, that's a stat. You did a very truncated version of it. Well done. The thing is, it takes so much time to explain this. And then the bottom line is Jason Kenney involved in this. Kenney's saying, no, I am not. There may have been wrongdoing. It wasn't from my campaign. All the questions seem to be centered around Jeff Callaway. Of course, his campaign was in deep collaboration with the Kenney campaign. But unless you have something pointing to Jason Kenney, it's hard for voters to really understand why is this relevant. NDP comes out really strong on this. Of course, yesterday, the Premier, when she launched her campaign, was saying, you know, that Kenney cheated. I'm quoting her. He cheated to win the UCP leadership race, that he since lied about it. So she's going really strongly against Kenney. And Kenney, like today and yesterday, just says, look, I did nothing wrong. I followed the rules. No one from the RCMP is under a criminal investigation, perhaps, but no one's talked to me about this. It's all focused on somebody else. So it's easy for him, in a sense, to duck this. The NDP is trying to go after Kenney because that fits into their narrative. They can't go after, in terms of the economy, things are slowing down. There's no pipeline in the ground. The expansion plan has been delayed. So they're going after Jason Kenney, the person. They've got attack ads. They launched another attack ad today against Jason Kenney. So it's all about Jason Kenney. He's saying basically nothing to see here in terms of his background. He's focused on the carbon tax, scrapping the carbon tax, all about jobs and the economy. That seems to be the big issues in Alberta, is jobs and the economy and getting a pipeline built. No one seems to be really focused on the kamikaze gate, at least not now.
Marcella, what do you think? Is that true that unless they're able to, unless the scandal is, or controversy, I'm sorry, whatever you want to call it, is directly implicates Jason Kenney in some way, it's hard for it to resonate?
Well, I don't think so necessarily. You know, it's been 24 hours, right? But I did last night have a chance to speak to a buddy of mine who's on the campaign. They are hearing it a little bit at the doorsteps. I wouldn't, you know, I don't disagree with Graham. I think the economy is a super important issue to people. But what I think this so-called kamikaze collusion issue really speaks to, that might reverberate back on Jason Kenney, is the feeling that people have that, you know, maybe he's not fit for the job. You know, I think there have been doubts over the past weeks and months, both in terms of some of the candidates that his parties and him have attracted. And I think that those doubts are being reinforced by the continuing, you know, and these calls, by the way, are coming from inside the building. This is not, you know, some brilliant work of opposition research that's found this information. These are people within his own party, both through this and several other issues that have arisen in the last few months that speak to how Kenney acts as a leader. And so the question becomes, are those the values? Is that the way in which people want the Premier to act? And I think in most cases, when people have a look at it, they will say no.
Do you think, William, that if Mr. Kenney keeps getting questions about this and about his leadership vis-a-vis this controversy, it could damage the campaign?
Well, I have to say, maybe I'm the only one who found the tone so far coming from Premier Notley and the NDP to be a bit surprising, given the incredible negativity and the personal focus on Jason. It seems kind of like the campaign you'd run if you were a plucky opposition party trying to take down an incumbent government. But I think it's because they really don't want to talk about their record over the last 4 years. They don't want to talk about how many jobs have been lost. They don't want to talk about the stall in business growth. They don't want to talk about investment leaving the province. Instead, all they want to do is play personality politics and throw as much mud as they can, hoping some of it sticks. And I don't think that's what Albertans want. I think Albertans want a plan for the economy. They want a plan to create jobs, and they want a plan to protect the energy sector. And I think that's the message that's going to resonate for the UCP.
Okay, Graham, I want to know sort of bigger picture. What do you think the big issue of this campaign is going to be? I know it's hard. I know that campaigns matter and a lot can change, but at this time.
Like changes, there can be a massive change in this campaign. As it stands right now, say you get the big issue, I think, is still jobs in the economy, getting a pipeline built. Notley was all set to campaign on the economy recovering, getting more jobs, and a pipeline in the ground. The pipeline's being stalled and the economy is stalled. And so she is more or less forced to go back on the attack against Jason Kenney. And as my colleagues have been talking about, will this work? We'll have to wait and see. I think the issue still is going to be the jobs in the economy. That's very natural issues. People are talking about that. You got to work pretty hard to try and understand the whole UCP leadership scandal. You can call it a scandal. But the problem is, will people pay attention? Will they care? So it goes back to this issue. The NDP is really focused on that, and Kenney's focused on more of a natural thing. Even though Kenney's gone overboard, he's blaming the NDP for the collapse in the economy, the recession. It was the price of oil at the beginning. You go back to the PC campaign under Jim Prentice, we're forecasting a $5 billion deficit. They were forecasting cuts and job losses. But the NDP is now the one wearing this recession, and we know that people in Alberta tend to punish politicians who don't give them good luck.
Marcella and William, I'm going to ask you both the same question and ask you to kind of try to remove the partisan hat as much as possible. But tell me at this outset of the campaign, Marcella, beginning with you, what you think the NDP has to do.
Well, I think Rachel Notley started to do it this morning. Listen, I don't think there's any question that the economy is a top issue on the top of minds here in Alberta. And so what we saw Rachel Notley do today around the economy is to draw a very stark comparison between herself and the policies of Jason Kenney. Jason Kenney wants to hand a $4.5 billion tax cut to the richest and to corporations, how that's, expecting that to create jobs. Rachel Notley is saying we are going to keep investing and diversifying in our economy, including in using levers to ensure that our petrochemical industry starts to diversify into partial upgrading and into chemical manufacturing. That's something that the PC government should have started. That's a process that should have been started 10 years ago. But we've started it in the last few years, and so far there's $1 billion of investment that have triggered another $11 billion. There's 5 projects going on. There's 7,000 jobs. Those are real jobs that are starting right now, and she has to draw that. She has to draw that distinction, I think. She has to show, because that's a real 7,000 jobs. That's not just throwing $4.5 billion at rich people and corporations that are already profitable and hoping they'll create jobs.
Do you feel like it's hard, though, for that message of diversification, for example, to resonate when the economy there is still so dependent on the price of oil, and when also so many governments, including the NDP 4 years ago, and I remember covering successive PC governments there, too, saying, we've got to get away from our dependence on oil, and it's never really happened.
Well, you need to diversify in many ways, right? One of them is looking at the petrochemical industry and that opportunity, an opportunity which, by the way, other jurisdictions with oil and gas have been working on much more aggressively, so we're kind of running to catch up. And you have to look at other kinds of diversification. We heard Mr. Kenney again today say he's going to get rid of this carbon price. Well, that carbon price has paid for about 7,000 new jobs here in Alberta in new industries and invested in new technologies in different kinds of industries. And so again, this is a process, but you can't, there's no good in us just throwing up our hands, as Mr. Kenney seems to want to do, and hope that the price of oil is going to come back, or hope that he can bribe corporations to come into Alberta. You need to take serious action to diversify the economy, and that's a stark contrast.
Okay, William, obviously the partisan hats have stayed on. So what do you think the UCP needs to do in this election?
Well, I mean, I think what's going to be looked at by voters is who has a plan to deal with the very real problems that Alberta has. We have high unemployment. We have businesses closing their doors. We have our energy products landlocked and not getting to foreign markets. And they're going to look and think, Premier Notley had 4 years in order to try and resolve some of these problems, and they made virtually no progress. The alternative now
Will they take into
is-
account, though, the price in oil, right? And what Graham was saying about how much of that a lot of this is due to?
Fasci, absolutely. I mean, I don't blame the New Democrats for the low commodity prices. What I do blame them for is kicking Alberta's business community when it's down, for hiking their taxes, for applying a carbon tax that makes the cost of doing business in Alberta more expensive, for introducing uncertainty so that investors don't want to bring their money to Alberta, and for sending the message that Alberta under the NDP is really closed for business. So I think that what voters are going to be looking for this time is who has a plan to kickstart the economy, to create jobs, and to really get that Alberta advantage back. And I think that's what voters are going to look for.
Okay, I got to leave it there, but I think it's 27 days to the big day, so I'm sure we'll see you, all three of you, again soon. Really appreciate your time tonight. Thanks to Marcella Monroe, William McBeath, and Graham Thompson.